Hello, and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another Album of the Week video. This is episode number 233, and for today's episode, I will be celebrating the 40th anniversary of another legendary debut for one of the other big four of thrash metal. I'm referring to Show No Mercy from... That's right. Originally released on December 3rd, 1983 via Metal Blade Records. So without further ado, let's begin. Now everyone, and including their mother and aunt, know who Slayer are, being featured in countless of pop culture media, with their iconic Rain and Blood being their most popular album, being certified gold in the United States and certified silver in the UK. Slayer had released their final studio album, Repentless, on September... You know what? I won't mention that. But it was the first without the late Jeff Hanneman, who had sadly died on May 2nd, 2013, due to liver failure. 2009's World Painted Blood remains his final outing. Now with the recent news of Kerry King forming a new band, which will debut by next year, we'll see where this all heads to. But for today's episode, we have to start at the beginning. Being based out of Huntington Park, California, which is 5 miles apart from Los Angeles, formed in 1981 by Kerry King, Jeff Hanneman, Dave Lombardo, and Tom Araya. The band initially started off playing covers of their metal heroes, such as Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Black Sabbath, and of course, Venom. There were rumors being spread around that Slayer had originally went under the name Dragon Slayer, with it being possibly connected to the 1981 Sword and Sorcery film of the same name. Or maybe has to do with people finding out about the new wave of British heavy metal band of the same name as well. But Kerry King has since debunked this. Dave Lombardo eventually came out and said that Slayer were once going to be called Wings of Fire, but they ended up settling with Slayer, and the rest is history. Sometime in 1983, Slayer were given an invitation to open up for the band Bitch at the Woodstock Club in Anaheim, California. Slayer performed about 8 songs, with 6 of them being covers. Metal Blade Records founder Brian Slagel, who was there attending the show due to Bitch being one of his early signings, was very impressed with Slayer's performance, that he met with the band backstage to offer them to record one of their original songs for Metal Massacre 3, which would feature songs from the aforementioned Bitch, being their second comp offering at this point, Tyrant, Warlord's second comp offering, Virgin Steel, and Snow White, and within itself would create such a buzz that Brian Slagel would have no other option but to sign Slayer to his record label. Prior to recording what would soon be their debut studio album, Slayer had at least 16 other original songs, but Slayer would choose to record 10, as far as I know of, leaving songs like Simple Aggression, Blitzkrieg, no relation at all to the new wave or British heavy metal band song of the same name, which Metallica had already beaten Slayer to, Ice Titan, Assassin, Knight Rider, and High Priestess to remain studioless. These songs, of course, can be heard on the Live at the Woodstock Orange County 1983 bootleg record. Without any recording budget, the band had to self-finance their debut album, combining the savings of Araya, who was employed as a respiratory therapist, and with money being borrowed from King's father. The band would soon enter Track Record Studios, located in North Hollywood, California, in November of 1983, with label owner Brian Slagle, who would help out with producing, and as well as in-house personnel Bill Matroyer to engineer and mix the album. And from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., these 10 songs would be laid down, and soon after, the album was rushed into release, stocking shelves 3 weeks after the tracks were completed. So Slayer's debut full-length album, Show No Mercy, was released on December 3rd, 1983. So, featuring 10 tracks, clocking in at the length of 35 minutes and 18 seconds, these 10 tracks are, of course, kicking off with Evil Has No Boundaries, The Antichrist, Die by the Sword, Fight Till Death, Metal Storm, Face the Slayer, Black Magic, Tormentor, The Final Command, Cryonics, and then ending the album with the title track. So there you go, folks. There's your 10 songs. Now, I was exposed to Slayer with the song Raining Blood, which was featured in the PS2 video game Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Now, up to that point in my childhood, that was the real first heavy, and I mean really heavy song that I had ever heard in my life. And that's just before I would also, in a way, discover stuff like Cannibal Corpse and all that and all the other death metal bands. So Slayer was just one of the first really heavy bands I'd ever got to hear, and especially when it comes to thrash metal. But, however, it would have been my brother that would eventually heavily get into him, pretty much just picking up, for the most part, their major label stuff. But once my brother caught wind of the early Metal Blade period of Slayer, then that means I would too. And albums just like, let's say, Hell Awaits and so on was just different. And once I, of course, was exposed to Show No Mercy, just like my initial reactions to like Metallica's debut album, or of course their sophomore release, Ride the Lightning, and of course with Megadeth's first couple of albums, especially with Killing Is My Business, my reaction was pretty much the same with Show No Mercy. But at the time, there was just something about it that seemed striking at me. But since it has been definitely has been quite a while since I've at least listened to Show No Mercy, I of course had to, give it a revisit in preparation for this episode. And is my stance and opinion and thoughts or whatever, are they still the same as when I first heard Show No Mercy for the very first time in decades ago. While I have always been more of a Hell Awaits type of guy, Show No Mercy encapsulates this dark, grandiose aura to it that most of those early Metal Blade Records releases had. There is no denying the heavy Iron Maiden and Judas Priest influences that is heard throughout the entire record, but with the raw aggression of Venom, basically reminding me of a sinister sounding combination of Obsession and Omen, with all those satanic themes. The fact that there is a clear similarities to their influences is striking on this album. Funny thing is, when they were interviewed for the segments in the Combat Tour Live The Ultimate Revenge videotape, they were asked the question of who were their inspirations. They would eventually just mess with the guy and not name one single classic heavy metal band. Instead, they would mostly mention punk bands, especially with Dave Lombardo wearing a DRI shirt. Now, of course, we know that was, let's say, overblown or whatever, because eventually later for the South of Heaven album, they would cover Judas Priest's Distant Aggressor, which, of course, pretty much ends up explaining that, yeah, they did have at least some classic heavy metal bands that were their inspiration, but at the time, they were just being complete dicks.
Verbal abuse, Black Flag, people like that. Just the stuff that pounds in your head.
Though technically, Venom was indeed a big influence on Slayer's sound, but only Kerry King would probably take more credit for being heavily influenced by Venom. So while Slayer did start out sounding more like their heroes, once they apparently, as it's been said, caught wind of Metallica, Slayer would take notice of them in a big way, which shifted their direction towards the aggressive style of metal that we've come to know as thrash metal, of course being mixed in with the real raw aggression of hardcore punk bands. The punk influences, as stated, are also very evident on this album, especially with songs like Fight Till Death, The Final Command, and the title track, which shows signs of Slayer's slatanic thrash that they would further develop on with the sophomore albums. With all these punk influences that is pretty much heard and found within these songs, to me, it makes them sound like a punky Judas Priest. Even the classic album opener, Evil Has No Boundaries, which even features guest vocals from future Dark Angel drummer Gene Hoglan, just sounds like a punkier version of Iron Maiden's Prowler. Then you have a classic like The Antichrist, which begins to show early signs of where Slayer would head to. Same could also be said for Die by the Sword and the ever so iconic Black Magic, which come across as being grandier, especially in Black Magic's case, with that epic build at the beginning. But the classic metal riffing is still quite apparent. Speaking of epic, grandier tracks, this now brings me to my absolute favorite song off of this album, and is easily one of my all-time favorite Slayer tracks. I'm talking about Metal Storm Face the Slayer. This, to me, truly encapsulates those Judas Priest and new wave or British heavy metal influences, just from the epic beginning build to which it transitions to those striking dual guitar licks from King and Hanneman, to even Tom Araya's bass playing. But once it gets to the Face the Slayer portion, it's Take No Prisoners, just masterfully. And finally, speaking of those new wave or British heavy metal influences, the criminally underrated Cryonics has it all, with its infectious galloping pace and more of those dual guitars from King and Hanneman. It's a song that I personally feel deserves more attention. There's just a plethora of classic metal riffing that is just heard throughout the entire album. Something they would begin to deviate away immediately after. I mean, like I've been pointing out here, King and Hanneman are playing a lot out of the K.K. Downing and Glenn Tipton playbook with their guitar parts, and Tom Araya is even doing his best playing out of the Steve Harris playbook of rhythmically going in sync with them and providing some bass notes that I feel Tom Araya would sort of tone down on. Of course, Dave Lombardo is a boss on this album. Even if his drum snares sound like every single drum snare from every one of these early Metal Blade releases, thankfully his drum snares would be more solid sounding after this. So there you have it. Slayer's Show No Mercy is now 40 years of age. It's crazy. Now, I will always be a Hell Awaits type of guy, but Show No Mercy will always have a place in my heart. So, for those who, of course, who have lived and just breathed this album, you know what to do. But if you've just been familiar with this album and you just have, let's say, any sort of thoughts, whether they are either positive or negative, you can leave them all down in the comment section below. But if you are just not familiar with this period of Slayer and mostly are just familiar to begin with their more major label stuff, their more recent stuff to begin with, then please do check this stuff out. And let's say if you're just not a big Slayer fan in general and they just never really appealed to you to begin with, I'd say give the Metal Blade era stuff a chance, especially with Show No Mercy. I think you'll definitely find quite to like about the album. So, there it is, folks. There you have it. With all that said, this is Herbert Thrasher saying I'm out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone. And blast. Show no mercy.